Yeah. Goes green.
Hello? Yeah. So I've been told by my daughter Diletta, who is studying still, she's after graduate studying now in England, that when you copy something or you take something from a text, you have always to mention the sources. And I am very, even though Manuel says I can get with the murder, in fact I'm very accurate in quoting the sources. And I have to say that the old Shipping and the Law conference could have been possible without some formats and some idea I've taken from my friend Yannis Kostoulas, organizer of Mare Forum. And since I'm not a professional organizer of conference, but I'm supposed to be a maritime lawyer, I also took the idea of this panel from Tradewinds, who organized a similar panel. I think some of you, including Richard, attended to that conference, which was the opening event of Posidonia this year. So we try to replicate with our own means, and the idea is actually to make a very lively debate on the situation of shipping nowadays. So I would like to ask Richard perhaps to propose the first question in his list of playing by the ear topics.
Good morning. Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. Just for the record, it wasn't my idea to make it difficult for the panelists. It was Francesco's idea not to respond to the questions that I proposed. So it's all a little bit of a mystery, but it'll be fun, I hope. Having fun in shipping is something that we aren't all experiencing at the moment. And John Lyras has already talked about aspirational regulation, which is going to be very challenging on very many different bases. Emanuele, you've talked also about the need for us to look seriously at how we comply with the regulatory bodies, which will come up with some difficult requirements, legislation, approved or unapproved. What we know is that shipping has to move forward. Can it afford it? The simple answer is that we, of course, had a crisis in 2008, which actually had been coming for some time, and I think a lot of us had been warning that we were building to a problem, which, of course, manifested itself in a banking crisis, which meant that we withdrew the financial support that many owners had relied upon, and with a significant percentage reduction in what's available, not to mention cost. This heralded a time when we needed new capital. And Jeff Pribor and myself stand on this panel, quite rightly accused of potentially introducing something which has become very challenging for many ship owners that face the struggle that both, I think, Emanuele and indeed John Lyras can refer to, which is that we have fed a system, a shipbuilding capacity included, with further funding beyond where we needed to. It was obvious in 2008 that we needed to introduce new capital to replace the problems that were facing the banks. But now we have a different issue. Now we have a lot of new capital which doesn't really understand the problems that a contracting demand scenario for bulk shipping is causing an immense amount of pain to people, and the banks have to look at themselves now very carefully in order to undertake what this community in Naples in large extent will require. And that is that there are a lot of ship owners being artificially propped up. The financial requirements that the ship owners are going to face in terms of compliance is going to be an immense challenge. So I have to say that shipbrokers and investment bankers alike have to look at themselves and see what we've done to the community. We've introduced a lot of people who don't understand shipping in the same way as a number of the people in this room that have been in shipping for a long time. There has to be some order in shipping. We have to actually scrap, get rid of obsolete ships. We've created obsolescence with new technology at a time where we've had record low shipbuilding prices. It's a fantastically interesting time. Of course, regulation is going to drive one of the messages that I've had for shipping for a long time, which is the refueling of ships in a different way and creating ships that will indeed be able to meet the commercial challenges that we will face. But I'd like to hand over to Jeff a question, and that is, we've brought all this capital in. I think an awful lot of private ship owners would like to see it exit. On that exit, there's going to be further damage. Consolidation in some businesses has worked. The investment bankers now talk about it working in tankers. Emanuele, you've actually, I think, done a wonderful job in the ferry business of actually bringing consolidation, which has been rewarding. I have to say, in the liner business, they face enormous challenges by ignoring, to a large extent, what the new regulations are going to mean for fuel propulsion systems, which was a subject that the panel discussed yesterday. But if I can, Jeff, I'd like to know, when do we actually expect some of these equity players that have invested many billions and have placed us in a difficult position because a lot of it has been channeled towards new ships that we never needed. And of course, we have this continuing spectre of fees basically sponsoring marketing by both shipbrokers and investment bankers that has become quite irresponsible in encouraging outsiders to invest heavily in this industry.
Well, Richard, thank you, I think, for your first playing by your question. And for the record, unlike you, I've been on the ship-owning side for almost 9 years before coming back to investment banking. So before you tar me with the same investment banking and broker brush to this entire audience that doesn't know me, I have been an owner for many years. So, but that said, I'm now in the same position as you, as an intermediary. And usually, just as Richard has done, when a broker or an investment banker is criticizing himself about bringing too much capital in, it's another way of bragging about how well he's done. So congratulations, Richard. You've done a terrific job at your firm in bringing lots of capital to the industry, good or bad. Yeah, I think we don't want to cannibalize too much the topic of the finance panel later, but I think it is a question that's asked a lot in the United States today, is whether this influx of both private and public equity into shipping since 2008 has had a bad effect on the shipping cycle, or on shipping in general. And it's not a question that can be easily answered, open for debate. To answer your question about the exit of private equity, I would say this: the first investors to get in were in 2010, because that looked like, I remember it very well, I'm sure you do too, that after 2 very bad years, it looked like a good time to invest. It was obviously too early. Some of those investors are looking at exits now, IPOs for shipping, et cetera, and not being able to get them done yet because of the market is not cooperating. Luckily for them, they have 7 to 10-year investment horizons. So the current disposition, Richard, of the private equity investors I know who got in early is, I can wait. I can wait a little longer. I'll be patient. I'm not going to force consolidation yet. I'm not going to force an exit yet. I'll give it a couple more years. So if you come back a year from now, we'll see. If nothing's happened in the shipping market, I have a feeling the answer might be they're starting to get a little nervous. But as of now, they're putting on the brave face and saying they can wait a little longer before the exit.
Well done, thank you. Did you want to?
Yes, I'd like just to make a comment here, because I think there are some similarities between insurance sector and shipping, in that the main driver, I think, in many ways, why the influx of capital has been made possible is the extremely low interest level, which will prevail, we believe, for a long time, because the world is saddled with debt. We can't increase the interest levels, simply. And my worry, like in insurance, is that this capital, which is highly opportunistic, is based on the fact they think that they can time exit entry and they can optimize. If that becomes in insurance and in shipping, the state of what we will see forward, challenging times are going to be there because they will definitely pump in and withdraw as they feel fit and proper. So it's a totally new investment portfolio strategic way of thinking that we are seeing in insurance. Whether it will continue, and in reinsurance, whether it will continue, we don't know. In shipping, we can ask the same question. Is the capital markets so efficient? The capitalism in the truest form, you see the rudeness of it. And they have no respect for tradition, no respect for competence. It's about timing, entry, and exit to satisfy their stakeholders, full stop.
That's pretty daunting for ship owners to be competing with. Ugo, I think we are aware that there is a whole new breed of ships that are going to be built over the next 10 years. Sorry guys, we haven't stopped with shipbuilding. Shipbuilding is still there. Dangerously, it's politically supported, particularly in China and in Korea. And of course, Japan continues to be able to degorge vast quantities of new ships into the industry. The affordability of the investment is going to fall into the hands of the very people to whom you refer, who seem to be quite happy over the past 5 years to live with barely an existence. Actually, the fact of the matter is I'm not quite certain that it isn't just a punt. It's a punt that goes right or it goes wrong. If it goes wrong, they exit, and somebody else picks up the pieces. For this community here in Naples, amongst the ship owners, what you require is the reconstruction of your own balance sheets and, of course, the financial means to be able to invest in the next generation of ships. Ugo, you, as a classification society, are not a police force for the good behaviour of the shipping industry, but you will be overseeing new technology introduced that we discussed yesterday, as I mentioned earlier, in order for ship owners to be able to afford to be part of this next generation of shipping. How much do you think, in realistic terms, your clients, and I'm talking about the classification society clients, understand what that means, and to what extent do you think that they may influence some of Jeff Pribor and Richard Fulford-Smith's less disciplined third-party outside investors who haven't been used to the challenges of shipping to actually try to comply with what you would recommend is a proper course forward?
Thank you, Richard. Of course, we are speaking of vessels which are developing quickly due to the completely changing environment, not only in shipping but in the world economy. And these developments are still not clearly defined in terms of where they are going. Yesterday we were debating about the type of fuel or the way of complying with the international regulation on the use of ultra-low sulfur fuels that will enter into force in the ECA zones, but also to the 0.5 that will enter into force in 2020 or 2025 in the whole world, and the opportunities are many. Now, it's difficult. You ask me how the owners can somehow give a discipline to the ordering of new buildings. If I understand well, this is your question and your doubt. Unfortunately, I think the players, as John, as Jeff has underlined, are not only ship owners, or in this case, we see a new, let's say, a type of ship owner who is more a manager than an investor. If you think to what is happening with these funds, all these funds have been somehow advised by ship owners, more or less experienced, but in any case by ship owners. And therefore, but in this case are ship owners who are investing really a negligible part of taking the risk on a negligible part of the investment. So it is more, I am feeling, a speculative matter than something more entrepreneurial. And therefore, I have not a clear answer and a positive answer to your question, because I don't know how much ship owners can really influence the inflow of all this capital that is coming into the market. Of course, the reaction of the ship owners must be quick, and one of the words, of course, in this case is consolidation. There is no way you cannot play as a small operator against operators who have hundreds of vessels and that can have an economy of scale that is completely different. So the answer will be most probably consolidation in order to create players which have about a size that is comparable to the one of the investors.
John, you represent quite a large body of private ship owners in Greece. Many of them are exactly in the category that Ugo has just talked about. How do you think the private ship owners in Greece would respond to listening to the need for this consolidation to move forward?
Let me tell you first that my godfather, who was a very wise man, gave me a lot of advice. One of the things he told me was never have partners in your firm, which is a private firm, and not a listed firm or not a kind of a public concern. And this is the case with most Greek shipping. Right now, I think the number of firms that have been into the capital markets in one way or another around 20 out of maybe 500. So the advice he gave me, as I said before, was never have partners in your business who don't know what it's about. And I think this was very good advice. Also, I have to say that we have to distinguish in shipping, as I said a few minutes ago, between the bulk sector, which is very entrepreneurial and mainly private, and other sectors where you have much larger firms, some of which are private, but some of which are also listed and therefore have a corporate culture and corporate outlook and modus operandi. This is primarily the case in the liner industry, for instance. So it's not the same for everybody. And now, as far as the bulk sector is concerned, which is where Greece is mainly, the Greek fleet is mainly involved, we have relied for decades on bank financing. And this has become a big problem, as we all know, since 2008 in the West. So I think that one of the reasons why we have this issue right now of private equity or hedge fund money coming into shipping, which is the kind of money that my godfather would say is not the right money to have in your company, is a result of the fact that commercial bank financing has dried up. So if you want to remain in this business, and as Mano said this morning, the shipping cycles do not coincide with the economic cycles necessarily, or even often. So if we want, especially in the West, because there's a strategic dimension to this, to remain in this business, then people are going to try and get finance wherever it's available. Most of them, we hope, are going to be responsible, but there are going to be people that, as Ugo said, are going to be purely speculating. And not only on the part of the investor, but also on the part of the recipient.
Thank you, John. And I think that an awful lot of Greek ship owners, as there are here in Naples, ship owners that take seriously the challenges that partnerships mean. Ugo, did you want to just say something?
Just to add another small point that is, I don't think is very small, but about the entrance of the, let's say, the capital, the equity, and not only equity into shipping. There is a new also thing that is going, that hedge funds are starting to buy the debts of some ship owners. In this case, they can have an extreme strong influence on the decision-making process of these ship owners. This is, again, a very speculative approach, and something that we have to take into account.
Francesco.
I think, Richard, you actually misquoted yourself, because you said that we should make a tricky question by the year. And it's true that you are a very good broker, and you know, broker can be able of saying anything, but we are in front of many witnesses. So, but I appreciate, I think since my friend Emanuele says I can get with the mother, I'm sure I can get also with you. Having said this, I very much sympathize with the last thing that Ugo was saying. Here there is some authoritative representative of Mediobanca, so we call it the sitting room of the Italian industry and finance. And the historical senior director of Mediobanca, Mr. Kucha, once said the shares you have to weight them, not to count them. And then somebody else said, no, this is, now the time is over, now you count the shares. You know, the same thing with the capitals. You know, I don't know if we can say, okay, this is right, this is wrong, is ethical. I was a name in Lloyd's, and we were expecting good profits after the bad years, and then the Bermuda companies, John, I think you were very right in saying that it's very similar, the insurance market to the shipping market. Probably this started even a bit earlier, that the underwriters started from, they recruited a very good underwriter at Lloyd's, and he was writing for them ruthlessly. But, you know, I think that there is nothing we can do about it. If we think that, I mean, this is, okay, you have your industry ship owners, and you have to look after them. So you cannot play and gamble like these people. But either you take advantage of these capitals, this is my opinion, or these capitals who are too much ruthless and make the wrong bets, they have to burn their fingers. I think this is the roots of capitalism. There is no, we are in the church, but unfortunately in the shipping market and in world economy there is no God. We can pray, we are, I'm sure, very respectful. This is not our kingdom. Our kingdom is the kingdom. And I would like to ask to somebody who is playing with a lot of people who are also sometime, if not financial investor, perhaps lending bank, who are not always sensibly lending to some fleet, also in the Mediterranean Sea, sometimes also perhaps in other sceneries. We have a very sound ship owner. Comes from a family tradition, and I think the Grimaldi, this generation, Manuel, Luca, Diego, they have increased at least tenfold, if not more, the fleet, which was already very important when Manuel started with his brother Gianluca his career. Now you can produce, replying to Richard, here in Naples, some very strong and sound and impressive financial accounts, balance sheet, and probably, I mean, I would like to ask you also in your role of president of the Italian ship owners, what is the best way to take advantage or not take only the disadvantage of this type of situation and of the global financial world?
I think a lot of things have been said. And let's start from the possible excess of liquidity that there is that might enter the business. I take your point of view that, Francesco, that if they enter wrongly, they are going to hurt themselves. This has happened already. Many companies, particularly in my field, there are this type of equity company that bought companies for 1 billion, and now they cannot find a buyer for 200,000, for 200 million euros. So their losses are enormous. And in many cases, in most of the cases, they have not been successful, at least in my business. But I think that is their risk, responsibility. What I think that it is very important, I think that was touched also by John, it is that it is extremely important that for the shipping companies, and particularly for the family companies that are operating not only in the bulk but also in other sectors of the business, that the traditional channels, which is the money coming from the bank, should, in my view, be available, particularly during this type of cyclical crisis, because that is extremely important. And I think that is what was lacking, perhaps, in this crisis, and has determined also the end of some companies, which I am sure that with that type of support they would. And some of these companies have been there for 4 or 5 generations, and they have the right system. The only thing is that once that this type of cyclical crises are there, I think the support must be there, provided there is behind a serious ship owner, there is a serious company with a serious organization, with a serious governance. And I think also what frightens a bit me, because could be highly speculative, is that the money which is owned by the ship owners to the bank is sold to this equity, because that will take a very, very speculative type of approach, which I think really it should not be the case. That is a bit frightening. But said this, I think the other points that were touched today in today's conference that I think also were introduced by the chairman, which perhaps are more important for all of us, is the very irresponsible approach that was taken by legislation at different levels, implying types of constraints that are not addressed by the toolbox themselves. That I think is highly irresponsible, and it is extremely dangerous. Also because the timing which is given to the industry to address these issues is often too short. And I refer to, for instance, to the, scrubber and to the 0.1 sulfur. I think that this time we have been lucky enough that, particularly only for the ECA zone, this might be addressed and without too much cost. But it is the type of approach which is very, very frightening indeed. Because today is the sulfur 01, tomorrow NOx. What about the water treatment? First of all, before making legislation, we have to know the cost of this legislation. There must be an economical impact study. We have to know if it is sustainable, not only environmentally, if it is sustainable economically by the countries and by the operators who are operating in that very sector. And also we must have trials. So in the beginning, if we want to reach certain goals, we have to take a voluntary type of approach, what I was trying to say this morning. In other words, to sponsor and to pay for the people who are leading and to make some experiment, and once only that the toolbox will be available, then to make it within a reasonable time frame to make it compulsory. And I think this is very, very important for the future of our business. Thank you.
Emanuele, thank you very much. It follows on neatly, really. We're talking about operational challenges. And John, I think you'd like to say a few things about that.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking of is that I found that the extremely well-structured introduction by Mr. Grimaldi, followed by Mr. Lyras, where in particular, if I may say, that there are 3 challenges that are huge to the industry. It's making an honest return on your capital in a market where there is convergence of capital and there is abundance of it. Secondly, there is a development of a compliance culture where the politicians and others are pushing hard and shipping may be accepting too much. And like you said, Emanuele, there is also this issue about sustainability and operational sustainability. You mentioned that as a third point. What we see from the insurance sector is that we find that if the global community is to accept shipping as a clean, proper, sustainable industry, we need to go beyond what we currently do. And from what we've seen up north, there is an increasing degree of cooperation. I think, to you, Hugo, that the cooperation between underwriting and class, lawyers, technical, to be able to respond with all our competence on immediate notice and the best possible advice to the owners so that we can manage the peak risks. And I think the Costa Concordia is not the best example of how industry has responded. So we have to say, and I think that was Emanuele's point, we need maybe to work more across the industry and find the right mix of trusted partners that the ship owners need to be able to respond with the professionalism that the global industry is requiring more and more. That was my comment.
I think indeed taking care of the fabric of our industry is something that we need to emphasize has probably not been sufficiently in focus. Too many of us, I've already talked about Jeff unfairly because he was indeed a ship owner, we've dwelt too much on the financial punt. I think that's really what you're talking about here. Did you want to add anything at this stage? Because I'm very conscious of your silence at the end.
Well, no, if I
no, you're not
may, I would like to ask Clive, okay, we have got certain rules which are the rules of the capitalism, but we have also a legal system. In this room, the next session, the financial session, our friend Mark Clough, QC, who is one of the best competition and shipping competition lawyer, but also finance competition lawyer in some respects, will make a short presentation on competition law. We have been touching, perhaps Manuel for is a very gentle person, hasn't done it as a could have been done, the fact that some today competitors should not be able to compete because they went bust already perhaps more than one times, but perhaps there is some bank that is continuing in order not to, for some reason that may be political, that may be balance sheets, that may be the most obvious, but certainly are not sound financial, industrial, economical credit reasons, they alter the competition. We have got this access to private and public market. This is very much in the spirit of a very well-functioning system, provided there are certain rules that are respected. If the rules are bent, we may arrive to a situation of catastrophe, as is the existing crisis we are trying to head out. The global economy was actually due to not appropriated use of financial new financial schemes and instruments. We have personally, I don't know if all my colleagues and ship owners here in this room, I think we always trusted the London arbitrators as, if not 100%, let's say 90, 85% impartial, competent, and well, there are always exceptions to the rules. There are exceptions for ship owners, for banks, and sometimes some awards may not please you, and in this unpleasement there might be some reason. But I think you are giving an outstanding contribution, and as the LMAA, with its rules, with this sort of not written code, the procedures are very brief. But I think you do a lot of things because you are a commercial man, and at the same time you know the law. How long can we rely now that a lot of the shipping is moving far east? He was talking to Emanuele Lauro. He has got a claim office now in India. The Far Eastern lawyers, they are, you always, sometimes we go together to the Far East, but will London and English law, and also the practice that is not only English law, we have got very important non-English law jurists here, but which has been built, I think the shipping law system will serve the industry in the future. And how do you see here also the global challenges and the future developments?
Well, I think as arbitrators, we're always very conscious that we are, to some extent, spectators of what's going on in the industry, and perhaps what arrives on our desk reflects what has happened in the ship owners' financiers office many months before. So it's appropriate that I'm standing on the edge at this platform. But nevertheless, dispute resolution remains important for ship owners and those in the shipping market. And London has, as Francesco said, been trusted worldwide for many years. Of course, the Far Eastern markets have opened up. Singapore is very aggressively marketing in every area, including, of course, the provision of dispute resolution services. I think if one looks at the statistics, the publicity that the Far Eastern venues are getting is disproportionate. For example, last year in London, the figures suggest there were about 3,500 maritime arbitrations, whereas in Singapore there were no more than 80, half of which were domestic arbitrations in shipping. So what one reads in many publications perhaps distorts the true picture. But that's never grounds for complacency. And I think it's very important that as lawyers and arbitrators in London have done in the last few years, that we make a very conscious effort to involve the Far Eastern market, the Chinese market in particular, who for a long time, and especially the shipyards, were very suspicious of London arbitration. They felt that London was biased against Far Eastern shipyards and were looking possibly to try and impose a different form of dispute resolution, perhaps in China, Shanghai, in their contracts. And I think that we've largely succeeded in persuading the Chinese market that London and English law can be trusted. I think that's important. We engage in dialogue very much nowadays with those markets to ensure that the awards we produce can be enforced in China. So it's been a bit of an education process. But I'm confident that as long as we don't sit on our hands and do nothing, that the English system of law that is so important and so familiar to people in shipping will continue to be the preferred choice.
I think we can all say here because indeed, as somebody who's been involved in shipbuilding for many, many years, I think one of the growing concerns has been the extent to which we continue to rely on English law for, as you say, dispute resolution. Emanuele, you've been very active in the shipbuilding markets and very successfully. You've managed to bespoke ships to your services and to the requirements that you have in your cargo business. One of the challenges for us all is to actually see the future demand for cargo and where it's coming from. And we've actually now got, I think, a fairly clear understanding in the bulk markets of where the imbalances are. But maybe I could ask you to talk a little bit about your experience of tailoring your new ships, not only to meet the requirements, the regulations, and all the other things we talked about, but also for the services that quite uniquely you've managed to actually undertake in a successful financial mode, where so many other people have failed.
Thank you. I think particularly in our type of business, I think the most important thing is that we, and particularly now during this crisis, We are building vessels with true innovation and with really exceptional performance, at least theoretical, before building them, compared with the vessels that we have. So in other words, these ships that in the deep sea we will receive, the ones in Korea, and even the 5 ships that we ordered for ACL, they are totally different from the ones that we are employing today, and they have really outstanding performance compared to, and in any case, they are taking the place of vessels which we believe that they had a long life and they need to be scrapped. Today, there is a different issue that there are a lot of so-called eco ships, which remain to be seen if they are really eco or only because they are going slower. And perhaps also for many of these ships, even if you take one existing and you retrofit perhaps with a new propeller which is more adequate for this low steaming, then you get the same result. So I'm not so sure that to order perhaps a little bit irresponsibly that you finish to ruin the equilibrium between supply and demand, and this will mean that the crisis will be prolonged by these very ships who are entering the trade. So I think for most of my ships, I have invested an enormous amount of money this year, over 100 million, but just to adequate the fleet that we have to the needs of today and to reduce the cost of fuel. Yesterday you had my nephew, the engineer Bocchetti, in the panel that have explained how much we have and how much we have invested in treating with silicone paint 50 ships, retrofit propeller on another 10 ships, and now buying scrubber for another 14 ships. So there are huge investments that have to take place, but in most of the cases you don't need a new ship. Unfortunately, the life of a ship should be 25, 30. When I was talking about the problems that we have, I was referring to ships which are 40, 45 and are still trading in certain trades, and they, particularly if they are passenger ships, are perhaps irresponsible, particularly when we have a situation where the supply of the ship is much more than the demand. So we have to take, I think, responsibly, particularly at a macro level. But again, I think only the companies who are making and taking a sound solution in the long term, they will find the credit, they will find the money available, they will find the finance, and I think that they will also prosper in the future. Thank you.
Well, I think actually I know what you have done also in, having contributed to some of these projects mainly from the legal side, I know what you have done, and you actually, in order to contribute to, also as a lawyer, you have to understand what is the philosophy behind the project, and so I think you were always trying to be ahead, also as far as the main saving that you can have a competitive advantage, which is the size of the vessels. So not only very modern vessel, but in order to prepare this, a lot of hard work is needed on the line. And I think even more, there should be some reasons to do this for a global market of tramp vessels which are hired to the charters, who are those who actually control the cargo and not the line itself. Yesterday we had a very interesting preparatory workshop, and it was in fact on eco vessels, and the question was why investing in eco vessel. In fact, I think the shipyards, when they saw that there was an excess of tonnage, they started, and also the makers, to sell us a new concept of vessel. So the narrative that these vessels, even though as Emanuele said, there is not any need in many classes of the business of new vessels, they will outperform the old-fashioned non-eco vessels. And I invited Jeff Pribor to be part of this session, workshop organized with the support of the Young Shipowners Association Corporation and the Athena and Varsila, and we had also some other makers like EcoSpray speakers, the Arena, the Lloyd's Register, and other, the CNR, other very distinguished associations. I thank Andrea Garolla and Alberto Moroso for their contribution, as all the owners who spoke in the panels and speakers. But we have so new projects that will be financed with loans, with private equity, will be financed by the public, by company listed on the stock exchange, that are sold because the narrative is that this vessel will outperform the old-fashioned vessel. And so I would like to ask Jeff, who from New York and London is in the middle of all this. I think he matches a lot of capital with new projects. What is his opinion? You already anticipated something yesterday, but I think we are here in a much in front of a much wider, bigger public.
Thank you, Francesco. The thing I've been thinking about as I listen to some of the comments is that in yesterday's panel about eco-ships in particular, you know, we all know what makes shipping cycles work. I mean, the shipping cycles are different, but in broad principle, when things get bad, new vessel prices get cheap, and shipyards need to reduce their prices, and so shipping people are tempted and then give in to temptation and buy the ships, right? That's normal greed, that's animal spirits, it's not greed in a bad way, it's just a cycle. So the question now is whether we're adding fear to greed, right? The fear that unless you buy a new vessel, you will be made obsolete, so you must buy. So now that's the first question, is whether this cycle is different because we've invented a new type of animal that we're tempting ship owners to order maybe too many of. And the second thing, the question you're asking me, I'm not sure I'll give you an answer, but I just will articulate the question is capital such as that available in the U.S., privately or publicly, like, you know, the devil with the apple, giving, you know, too much additional liquidity to the ship owners who are tempted to buy now for two reasons: fear and greed. You know, I'll give you my opinion. I think there's always capital available. I think when ships are cheap, everybody orders, period. It's been true in every cycle in shipping. Richard, you're nodding your head. I hope you agree with me. So I don't think it's that this time it's the availability of eco ships or the availability of capital that's changed the cycle. I think at the bottom of the cycle, we always get too much ordering.
Jeff, Ugo, you wanted to add something on this topic?
Yes, just a small comment. No doubt that these new vessels which have been built with the great attention to performances will outperform the existing units. But as a ship owner, the calculation that you do is not only the consumption, which is extremely important, but also the money that you have put into a vessel, the cost of a vessel. If you take into account an investment on a second hand today, with the prices which have adjusted compared to the less efficient ships, it's not necessarily a worse investment to buy a second hand and to invest into a second hand at today's prices, because you can be as competitive as you are with a new eco ship with a higher price. But in this case, you are investing, you are putting your money into something that is existing and is not increasing the world fleet. What we really don't need in this moment is an addition of fleet, even if it is more efficient, but we don't need an addition of fleet. So what we need to do is, as much as possible, if you have money available, take into account also the second-hand market, which is a very good second-hand market with affordable prices.
And you will retrofit some of this vessel, perhaps.
In addition to that, you can improve also the quality of these existing ships. But in any case, if you make the real calculation, the financial calculation, and you take the price of the second hand of 5 years or 10 years, compared to the amortization and the running costs of a new building, you can be competitive with today's second-hand prices.
Actually, last year we had Mats Berglund, who managed a fleet of about 200 Handy and Handymax vessels, and he told Manuel when we were speaking, you know, in our panel, and also afterwards, I have my vessel steaming 8-9 knots, so this is the best way of being competitive in the high market. But I'm sure that John would like to say something on this.
I think I just want to emphasize this situation that we have of overcapacity. You know, I mean, we're in a church and of the one God, so it's monotheistic, and we need to look at the forest, not at the trees. So if you've got more ships than necessary plying the oceans because we don't lay up anymore, is that going to help the environment? And also, you need to expend a lot of energy and CO2 to build ships as well. So unfortunately, a lot of this environmental legislation is looking at the tree and not at the forest. Even SOx and NOx and all these things. We have scientists saying that sulfur is useful if it's not near inhabited areas because it sort of cools the atmosphere. So unfortunately, today we live in a world where sort of polytheism reigns, which means that everybody's looking at his little patch, especially the regulators and the politicians, and they're not looking at the whole picture. So yesterday we were told that even with the new technologies, you can get maybe 8 to 10% better fuel consumption for an individual ship. But if there are already 20% too many, and going forward, we're not going to reduce this overcapacity because there's so much shipbuilding capacity around the world, and it's industrial policy. It was industrial policy for the Japanese, for the Koreans, and now for the Chinese. And it's in their interest to have an overcapacity of vessels because they pay less freight. And they're basically trading nations, not shipping nations. So in Europe, we're shooting ourselves in the foot all the time. If we want to remain in this business and in this sector, we're doing all the wrong things. Thank you.
John, when I hear you, you speak, you are very convincing, you speak very well, but...
very inspiring.
No,
Virgin, Panagia, yes.
You are a virgin?
No.
Oh, okay. You are inspired by the Virgin. Yeah, that's right.
Francesco, can I?
Sorry, Richard, it's just a second. No, because, I mean, you pray well, you speak well, and you act according to, but I'm not so sure that some of your colleagues, you know, they say, well, we should not buy new vessels, new ships, there is an excess of tonnage, you know, the institution should not lend, providing they don't have a very special project. They get the capitals, public, private, or loans, and they haven't started. I mean, yesterday there was, unfortunately, and he'll come next time, because Emanuele Lauro, he should have participated to the workshop. His plane was taking off in Nice and took a storm of seagulls. One engine was cracked and the other engine started to, so they didn't have the time to discharge the fuel, and it was a very bad day for Emanuele. But I think in the next shipping and the law, we should discuss also with people who have done this. I must say something is important, because he is always accused to use private equity. And we have been, after this accident, also a bit to refurbish him, about half an hour on the phone. And he told me all the story of his life when the grandfather, they had 8 vessels, he sold the 5 best vessels, said, I want to retire, I'm too old now. And he took over and took the management of the commercial management of 80 vessels, and then he didn't have the capital, so he had to, but he didn't go to private equity, he went public. So this was his way of raising the money. So I think, I don't know if in the room there is, perhaps in the financial session, we may have more concentrated discussion of this. But yes, Manuel.
On this point, I think that I have perhaps the answer. When you are taking very often, and we see the case, that there are people who are taking this highly risky bet. Very often, if you see and you look well, they are doing with other people's money. They are not doing it with their own money. I think that therefore, it's easy to be a little bit irresponsible when the money is not your money. So I think that most of these bets that we see that were taken superficially, and we all knew that they were wrong, they have been, most of the cases, taken by people who are not using their own money.
Emanuele, I think we've got a consensus agreement in private shipping that indeed the financial investors have been looking for a sort of quick financial fix without considering too much the fabric of the business that we talked about earlier. Just one point, Ugo, you talked about the need for us not to ignore the opportunities that exist in investing in tonnage which is competitively priced in the second-hand market. Unfortunately, the areas where we would like to sensibly invest, which are in ships that are not too old, which have a future, which are worth investing in, tend to also be the attraction for people from that very investment community which are seeking immediate returns. Actually, it's been quite difficult to get institutional investors to look at supporting shipbuilding contracts, which one might say has been a relief. Actually, I think what we're looking at now is just the harsh economic realities of what new ships are offering, and particularly with the new propulsion systems and everything else that we've talked about. And we have to be realistic, and I think, Emanuele, I think that's a valid point that you've invested in a lot of new ships because of exactly that reason. I think that the community here is going to actually have to look at it in a slightly different way, because firstly, we have to repair the damage that we've already done. And when I say we've done it, the whole industry has done it, whether it's the Greek ship owners, whether it's private equity, whether it's public companies over-investing. The harsh reality is that for private companies today and for family businesses, it's extremely difficult to justify an investment when we know that we're looking at people who could be part of a 3-year fund, a 5-year fund, when the motivation of the people who manage it is purely fee-driven, and I think that's been a very common criticism. So we're up against it. I think that's really what we have to conclude. But I think an intelligent and practical approach, embracing all the challenges that you've talked about, John, in terms of dealing with the legislation, in dealing with the manner in which it's introduced. But just, I'm conscious that time is tramping on. And I just wanted to ask, going back to the legal position, and you're dealing as somebody who's looking at resolution of disputes. But the enforceability, of course, of legislation that we're going to be introducing is something that I think we all dwell on, and you've talked about the European Union's desire to potentially introduce things that may be impractical. How do we foresee that we're going to be policing what is intelligent shipping from a practical point of view, and to avoid the very disputes that you have to deal with, quite often in chartered party disputes, quite often in the construction of these new ships that are designed to be the miracle cure for those owners? How do you see the policeability, and how do you think that legally we're going to be able to enforce what we've planned from a compliance point of view?
I think there are great concerns there as to enforceability. And I think what perhaps is more worrying is that enforceability is going to be haphazard. I think enforceability, we're in a room and an environment here that has a very high level of conscience. Whatever we bring in by way of legislation in Europe and seek to religiously abide by is largely sidetracked in Far Eastern and other markets. And so my concern is that any compliance is going to be haphazard and it's going to actually erode our competitiveness.
At what stage do you think the insurance business, John, actually takes a serious look at people who obviously flagrantly ignore the requirements but manage to sidestep it, as Clive has said, because it's difficult to enforce?
I'm sorry, Richard, I didn't quite get your question. Sorry about that.
You insure lots of different people of different nationalities.
Yeah.
You obviously have looked carefully before you commit yourself to covering them at their operations. We've talked about the operational challenges. As we have this new legislation coming in, and I think Clive's indicated that it is difficult to enforce, at what stage do insurers actually get involved in almost qualifying ship owners to be insured? Yeah. And at what stage do you actually inspect rigorously the ships that they're managing? At what stage do we actually say, well, you're not going to be able to comply, you're actually disqualified from being covered under the insurance policies that need to be renewed on a regular basis?
I think I would, Richard, like to start by saying one of the key differentiators in underwriting is the availability of information. Yep. And I'll revert to that later on today, but big data is such today that you can automatically download and get information about just about any ship owner in the world. And our systems are such that we download from 28 databases. And we make up a long actuarial sort of a statistic about what should be the right price, what is the right quality, and things like that. But the funny thing, which strikes me time and time again, in financial industry, being in finance or in insurance, the wealth of data and models is exploding. But I think when I talk to the best people, and I have to say, they are not in Europe, they are in the US, and I'm specifically referring to some of my best, I would say, in spite of Swiss Re being here today, that General Re and some of their underwriting philosophy is outstanding. And what they have come to, which is an interesting and very subjective thing, is financial decisions, being underwriting or finance. A good way of putting it is it's probably not more than 50% that you can trust the model. 50%, like in any industry, is intuition, experience, trust, confidence, looking somebody in the face and saying, I believe in you, I like your story, I hate it, whatever. So that human element remains critical in spite of the enormous amount of data and models that exist today. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, John. I think we have been speaking a lot, and we started our proceedings a bit late this morning. There is a very important, two very important speech of General Camporini on geopolitics and of the migration and Mare Nostrum of Director Dal Penta. So, Peppino, now would you like to add your very wide, the voice of the wisdom to our little chatting about the challenges in which shipping is now and in the years to come?
Io chiedo scusa se non parlo inglese, perché da quando sono subentrati i miei figli, da 30 anni non parlo più l'inglese. Quindi se la persona che è in cabina potesse venire qua, potrebbe fare la traduzione di quello che io sto per dire. Oppure l'ingegnere Salerno potrebbe tradurre lui?
I have a suggestion. Since we are late, we anticipate the coffee break will be a bit shorter, and the people who requires headphones, they take the headphones, and we start in 10 minutes. Yes, we start in 10 minutes. So let's go now for the coffee breaks. Everybody who requires the headphones, because we have this translator and we want to hear how brilliant they are. And we have a quick, instead of half an hour, 15 minutes, okay?
I think we can get off it, can't we, down there?